LinkedIn presents.
What should organizations be doing to help maintain worker mental health as artificial intelligence becomes more prevalent at their jobs? I'm Morra Aarons-Mele, and this is The Anxious Achiever, the show that looks at the intersection of mental health and work and asks, how can we do both better?
The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by IBM. Businesses need a holistic AI strategy. IBM consultants and engineers can help design, integrate, and optimize AI solutions so they can be deployed at scale. IBM.com/consulting.
The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by SAP. SAP Business AI. Embedded across SAP solutions, it drives immediate impact. From Joule, your digital assistant, to AI-powered capabilities portfolio-wide, make confident decisions using your own data. SAP Business AI. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
The narrative around generative AI is broken. It's broken in the way the media covers it. It's broken in the messaging from large companies. Big, sweeping promises about how they're going to implement AI. As we've been discussing the last month, it's creating a lot of anxiety among the very professionals who are showing up to work every single day, waiting for this big AI revolution. We live in societies, and we move every day within systems that aren't always in our control. Work is a big system for a lot of us, and it feels out of control. AI makes it feel more out of control, which is part of the reason it's also super important to think about how companies and organizations should be evolving in the coming years. It's not enough just to implement AI technology. Employers need to be proactive to make sure they can continue to create cultures that people want to work in, and to get the best creativity and productivity out of workers as the landscape shifts so we can take advantage of the promise of AI. Our guest today is Susan Quain, who has taken the lead at large organizations going through major digital transformations throughout the past 25 years. Susan is an expert in digital employee experience, and she has some lessons to share about the right and wrong ways that companies handle this kind of change. I spoke with her specifically about artificial intelligence and why companies need to involve their people in the process. Because really, this is a challenge of changing people and behavior over implementing technologies. Here's our conversation about what companies and leaders can be doing better. Do you, in general, consider yourself a tech optimist or a tech pessimist, or how would you define yourself?
So I've worked in this industry, so digital, for 25 plus years. And I think I'd call myself a digital realist, which tends to steer towards the more pessimistic side because I've seen lots of digital technologies come and go. I'm a realist. So although I find everything very exciting, I think I always question. I'm super curious. And when I see people get excited about things, I always say, okay, let's calm down. Let's look at it. Let's see what the real value is. So love what I do, but very much a realist when it comes to digital based on my experience.
I wanted to ask before we dive specifically into AI, what general tactics have you seen in your career organizations used to implement successful digital transformation that doesn't freak everyone out or make everything feel overwhelming?
Well, one of the things that I always stay true to is very much involving the customer or the employee in everything I do from the outset. So a lot of work in more recent years has been done with employees, with workforces. And we talk about anxiety, right? When you involve and ideate with your people and you bring them along on the journey, that really helps to understand. It helps people adopt what you're looking to do. You make sure that you achieve their objectives, and they very much feel part of it. They very much feel at the center of that transformation. So it's not tech, it's people transformation. And even though it's digital transformation, it's very much about the people. And they're the people, I keep them at the heart of everything I do. And I find that tends to lead to better outcomes than when you go all kind of techie on them. Because I'm not a techie, don't want to be a techie. I'm just very technically minded, and I use that as an enabler to achieve what I need to do.
I'm curious if you can think back over your career of a transformation, either from an employee perspective or customer perspective, that did make people anxious, and what you took away from that experience.
I think I would use my most recent transformation, where this is in financial services, where we looked at creating a seamless digital experience for employees. That's something that tends to affect lots of different types of people, different departments, different levels of understanding. And it's really important to bring a real diverse range of skills and abilities across the organization to help achieve what you want to. And I think that's where, when I talked about bringing people with you, I like to lead discoveries. Discoveries are very important to me for success of a project.
Mm-hmm.
I've done that in my last company, and I did that in a transportation company as well that I worked at. You bring people together and you explain and you ideate and you make sure a lot of what needs to be done involves them, and it's going to lead to their jobs being easier to do as a result. So I got a lot of people who didn't really understand what I was trying to achieve. You try and make sure the ones who are the least tech savvy, and that's something I tend to focus on. I don't want to involve all the devs and all the people who are really au fait with technology. I try to involve a real mixture of people, like, I'm not saying that they're not tech savvy, but PAs, people who need to use the tech but don't always understand the tech, the knowledge workers, the people who use all these tools the most and will benefit the most. And also the more senior roles who don't necessarily use the tech on a day-to-day basis, but they need to buy into what I'm doing so they can be advocates for what I'm trying to achieve from a digital transformation point of view.
That's really interesting. Do you have focus groups, or
Yes.
how do you, yeah.
So we do a mixture of focus groups, interviews, surveys. They all form part of the discovery. I tend to keep the same bunch of people from the initiation right through to the launch. Because then you have a thread of user experience, is what I call it, and what it's called, UX, going through the whole program. And it's very much linked to the agile methodology in that you keep your people close. Every time you achieve something, you go back to those people who you started out with and you check it out with them. You say, okay, is this what we ideated about? Is this what you expected? Is this going in the right direction? Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. So I tend to keep those people on the journey and have checkpoints throughout the process to make sure they're close. And it's something I've held dear to everything I've done, because I've been burnt in the past where I haven't done that. And what that tends to lead to is poor adoption and confusion and losing people on the journey, which is very typical of a lot of digital transformation programs. People tend to go launch straight into the tech. They don't fall in love with the problem, is a saying that we had. You fall in love with the problem and help those people and bring them along with you. So that for me is the core of achieving good digital transformation again. So it's what I do in all of my programs.
Do you find that just the word transformation creates emotional responses in people?
It does. And that's why, transformation has become a catch-all term for most digital projects, hasn't it?
Or organizational, frankly, projects.
Everything. Everyone, especially since the pandemic, everyone is transforming. Everyone has woken up to the fact that certain things are broken in the workplace. The customer experience isn't as great as it should be. So the word digital transformation, I've never heard it used so much. Often it can be a simple process that needs to be streamlined. It's not those old programs where it's like monolithic, where everything seems to happen as this one big, massive program with hundreds of people on. But digital transformation has become a catch-all terms. So I always talk about chunking the elephant, making it small, making it digestible for people. So although we are transforming, we are changing, we dish it out as nuggets of change. And that's why it's important to be iterative, continuous improvement. And that's a term that I really like because it's more digestible and it feels more real to people because it's small and continuous. I think it sits better with people and doesn't produce as much anxiety. So it's always important to explain again what you're trying to achieve and what value add, not for the sake of it, what value, what you're going to provide to that person working with you, what's in it for them. And then they'll come along for the ride.
What about, I've also heard transformation used, especially recently, as an excuse to get rid of people, get rid of departments, clear away current functions for AI, transformation. What's your advice when transformation might come with costs to people?
To people. Well, I know, the beginning of the year, early this year and late last year, there was a lot of talk about AI replacing people's jobs. And I know there's still a lot of anxiety around that. So there is a real responsibility for leaders to explain and keep their employees close. For me, again, AI is another form of digital transformation. Generative AI is another form of digital transformation. It's something that is very exciting and it's something that can make our lives a lot easier, get rid of the drudgery, improve our productivity on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's really important to bring what generative AI is down to kind of the grassroots of the organization and have ordinary conversations with people about what it actually means. But the problem I see, it's this massive, sexy, great big thing that's the best thing since. And it feels as if it's this massive tech exercise where really it's about making lives simpler and helping people achieve things quickly and more simply. It's about simplifying our lives. I'm not saying that it may replace some roles because some roles may need to be replaced. Those drudgery roles where you're just repeating and it doesn't really offer any benefit to organizations, that may happen, right? Technology always provokes and leads us to do new things differently. That's what technology is all about, improving how we work. But I think those conversations that we have with our people about what it means to them and including them in the conversation, letting them moan, letting them really vent and air their frustrations is really important in workforces as we go about all this experimentation that we're currently doing at the moment.
How much of the AI imagined change, the best thing since, as you say, do you think is actually realistic? I have a good friend who's a very senior person in an AI team at a huge platform. And his point is sort of, everyone's like investing a ton of money in this, but everyone's a little bit scared to actually press go.
Well, it's because we're in an experimental phase. Everyone is talking about it. We don't actually know what it means for us yet, which is why it's a big experiment. Every vendor has some form of Gen AI in their product, but we're looking at how it works with our infrastructure, how it's going to work with our data, ethical considerations, making sure we're doing it most responsibly. The lawyers are looking into it. So there's a lot of unanswered questions at the moment. And I think that's what's exciting. I think this year is very much the year for experimentation. And as we get more intelligent data, clean data, and remember, a lot of the data in organizations where we haven't cleaned data for years, that's just sitting there, things, systems aren't talking to each other. AI is surfacing a lot of that mismanagement and poor governance. I think as we move forward, we're getting a lot more intelligent around how we use it. And I think next year and, the years to come will be the time where it really embeds. And we've done all the use case work this year, whereas next year will be, okay, how can we actually use this? Some organizations have progressed more than others, but I would say the majority of organizations are making best use of some form of AI at the moment. And it's something that is just continuing and will get better as we go along. And for me, that's been any new technology that's come in we kind of learn as we go along. And I think it's important for us to kind of say, we're learning and we're going to get better, but there's a lot of housekeeping that we need to do. There's a lot of realistic conversations. It's not cheap. A lot of these rollouts are very expensive and budgets have been cut considerably this year in many industries, especially around technology and digital. So it's really looking at how we pace ourselves and make the best value of it, really.
It's funny because, I've listened to a million podcasts about AI and what it means for work. And at no point has anyone actually said, well, actually, God, it might show us things about what we've been doing that we need to really get in order before we can even think about AI, which is not very sexy.
No, it's not. No. And that's why I say I'm a realist. I'm very practical it's exciting, it's great, but there's a lot of work to do. And I think it's based on just years of experience and seeing the state of companies, infrastructures and data and processes and the things that are needed to do before you can apply good AI so it brings, great stuff back. So there's an old saying, things like search engines and so forth, garbage in, garbage out. If you try to apply AI to a setup that doesn't have a seamless experience, systems don't talk to each other, data's not recorded or managed correctly, what AI will do is just draw on what you have in the organization. You have to almost recreate what you're doing to make sure AI picks up the data points correctly. There's loads of talk about large language models, a lot of that. So a lot of cleaning up, a lot of housekeeping is needed before it's really successful. But no, that's not the sexy story. You're right.
How should leaders think about the sort of mental health impact of this digital transformation on their people and prepare for it?
I think it's important to have a strategy in place, good comms, and very much working groups who are representing the grassroots of the organization. So you have leaders who set the overall agenda and strategy and vision and direction, but you hand it off, you delegate key people across the business to help galvanize and get people on board and, almost so you have your team of influencers who are able to influence up and down. And you always have people like that in most organizations, right? Who have the ability to be that sponge and take a lot of the anxiety that's coming from things like AI to bring it back to management, then bring it back down. And then you write the storytelling that sits behind a lot of this as well. It's very important to tell the story correctly, to feel as if you're talking, like you and I are talking right now. You placate any worries and to be authentic and say when you don't have the answers. So be very empathetic. I talk about being an empathetic and inclusive leader myself. And I think a lot of that is needed from leaders as we take our organizations through change, because there's a lot of people losing roles this year, for instance, and that is something that's ongoing. So we've got to be very mindful of the position we're in, where we're going through cost of living crisis. It's been, since the pandemic, lots of things have happened to affect people's lives. So I think it's more important than ever that we listen to our workforces as we still proceed with what we need to do, because I think there's a lot of potential here. But I think that storytelling and bringing people along, as I said earlier, in leadership and being empathetic and being fearful is normal, right? So a lot of that, I think, is needed more. And updating that strategy, we won't have the answers straight away. And anyone who says they have the answers, I don't think is telling the truth. So, we need to really be mindful of what does AI mean for this business. Don't look at what other people are doing and look at what it means for this business, the business you're in, and how it's going to really be a step change, because it will be a step change. It is already a step change for some organizations. So yeah, that's an ongoing conversation, open dialogue all the way.
I'd love to hear your advice to senior leaders, because as someone who has sat in the middle of change for so many years, You said that it's okay to say if you don't know the answers. And I find that a really difficult thing, especially I think with AI, there's a lot of competition. Everybody wants to be seen as a leader and at the forefront and implementing it. And I'm sure, although maybe it's slowing down their boards, we're asking them, what's your AI strategy, right?
Yeah.
How do you strike that right balance as a leader in tech transformation between creating a holding environment, bringing people along, but also acknowledging that this stuff is hard and not many people, if not no one, knows the answer?
I think I touched on it a bit just now, but I think it's having that authentic conversations around people are worried about, things like jobs being replaced, but it's about having an open dialogue across workforces. So in most of these programs that we run, we have kind of boards and we have a working group and we have a council and we have a cross section. If we're a global organization, we have an authentic leader at the top who's very willing to talk to grassroots people. We have sessions where people can come and talk, people who are on working groups, who can represent the business, represent the organization. You have a pivotal person. So what I've always done, I've always sat on the board and also sat on the working group and also been part of the employee council, it's sometimes called. And I've been that pivotal person who can take what's being said across the organization to senior leaders where we have the conversation at the top and that infiltrates, down, it permeates throughout the business where we have that top down and bottom up conversation where people truly have open dialogue. And then we turn that into things like articles, videos where we report back on what people have been saying. We almost take the temperature of the organization is what I like to call it as well, where we have these enterprise social networks where people can just talk openly to the business. We work out loud on these systems like Slack and, Teams and those type of systems. We have leaders on those platforms holding regular, whether it be lunch and learns, town halls, whatever the mechanism is.
And do you think people are really honest in front of leadership? I mean, it's challenging if you're a doubter or you have questions or you're anxious to put that on the record on something like Slack in front of leadership, especially now.
No, they're not always open to saying that with their name right next to them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of programs now where you can be anonymous. So we've had that in my last organization where you can say stuff and there's a board of people running that town hall or web chat. People are anonymous and they feel empowered and open to say what's really on their mind. So, you do need to hold some of these forums anonymously. So then people feel they're not going to be kind of victimized for what they're saying, but then you still take that on board. You still take that seriously and you look at outcomes. So you report back on the key points that were made through a lot of these channels and town halls, and you report back and you make it clear that you're going to do something about it. You take pulse surveys. Most companies now, they do pulse surveys. You take a pulse of what people are saying on a regular basis. I've worked in employee experience and communications a lot of my career, as well as pure digital and change. And you show action. So it's not enough to listen. You've got to show action as well. And a lot of companies will listen, but you don't often see, employers will often say, I said this 3 months ago, but I haven't heard anything back. And I haven't seen, what I've said being put into action. So I think it's important for us to listen, but for us also act on what we're hearing. And that shows authenticity. It shows that we're genuine in what we're looking to achieve. And I think it sounds like common sense, but some companies just don't work that way. They hide behind, spin, and they kind of say there's a party line that needs to be adhered to. And I think organizations that are, authentic and real in their communications that way are the ones that will empower their employees to feel that they are being listened to. And a lot of what's being said is very much for their own benefit and to benefit the business. It's not always easy. I won't pretend it's easy for someone who's worked in comms and employee experience for a long time. But I think that's another reason why leaders need to say, listen, I don't have all the answers. And that's why these different tiers of boards and working groups and councils where everyone can come together, because a lot of answers are actually coming from the grassroots of the organization and not from the leaders. And that's been openly acknowledged. So I think that type of working together often works wonders, and it empowers employees to think that they're part of the journey and they're part of the solution as well.
The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by IBM. Does your AI model really know code? Its specific syntax, its structure, its logic? IBM's Granite Code models do. They're purpose-built for code and trained on 116 different programming languages to help you generate, translate, and explain code quickly. The more your AI model knows about code, the more it can help you do. Get started at ibm.com/granite. IBM, let's create.
Tired of AI hype without results? SAP Business AI isn't just talk. It's embedded across SAP solutions, driving immediate impact for your organization. From Joule, your digital assistant, to AI-powered capabilities throughout the SAP portfolio, SAP Business AI helps you make confident decisions based on your own data, all while maintaining the highest security and privacy standards for growth-focused businesses. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
You know, it's funny. I was thinking about this, especially in the context of AI, where you read that the first jobs that will go are probably more junior entry-level jobs. And I'm curious how many companies are bringing in those employees at all, or how often those employees have a voice in, quote, transformation instead of just feeling vulnerable.
Yeah. And I mean, there has been that vulnerability where the very people that you're asking to work with you on a use case are considering their own jobs whilst working with you, but they're kind of playing along and, you know, hoping for the best, but thinking, my gosh, if I get too involved in this, is my job going to be under threat?
If this is a really good product, am I going to just, you know?
Yeah. And I think it's important to have those open conversations. And I think every technology that's come along is always unnerving. AI is no different. AI, you know, has been around for a long time, but Gen AI is a whole different ballgame, right? So I think the same conversations, and it's no different to when machine learning was a big deal, personalization, automation, you know, all these different areas of improvements in different aspects of technology are very much similar things need to be done in order to put your employees at ease.
Yeah. And it also sounds like you're advocating for more communication, not less.
No, more. But I think you don't have to necessarily engineer everything. I think as long as you show that the channels of communication are open and people are listening and the culture is such that it's conducive to that, then I think that's all that's needed. I think what happens is organizations where the culture seems to be very top down and the leaders are making all the decisions without really wanting to hear much from the employees is where you create the most anxiety and worry. Whereas the ones that have open lines of communication and the leaders are very approachable, very up to saying they're not completely au fait with everything that needs to be done, are the type that I feel will succeed the most in this kind of changing times. And I think that's what's needed. So I would say open channels, open lines of communication. So I feel that I can, you know, go and if I see the CTO in the staff restaurant, I can mention something to him and he might take that on board at his next team meeting. You know, what I'm hearing when I'm going around the buildings is this. And I've seen some very good leaders do that. They kind of have a pulse themselves as what people are saying and they take that to leadership. It's what I do because it's all about the people for me. They're holding me accountable as well. So I have to be the person that's listening to them and seeming to be approachable and kind of taking on board some of their concerns and worries.
I think this is really important. I think also there's probably a tendency in a lot of change initiatives I've seen in my career. You hire consultants, you hire experts to come in from the outside, right? Which is all well and good. I'm a consultant. But sometimes that's at the cost of embedding the people whose work will be most impacted by what the consultants are trying to change. And that's always a recipe for frustration and anxiety.
Yeah, most definitely. And this is why consultants, that are really worth their salt will have a comms plan in place pretty much, in the first few weeks of them joining, in terms of how are we going to engage the organization in what we're doing, how we're going to bring people along on this. If you just go and speak to the leadership team and pretty much carve up the way you do things and you don't bring people along, it often fails and it just creates more problems than not. And I've seen it fail in the past.
I've seen so many eye rolls, people will be like, oh, they brought in BCG, they brought in Bridgespan, they brought in McKinsey, and everyone rolls their eyes and is like, oh, great.
And they always come in as if they know all the answers, right? But it's important to take time to get to know the organizations. A lot of great consultants that I've worked with have taken the time to listen, ask me, what is the culture like? How do we engage with? Who do we need to engage with? What is it like in India versus APAC versus continental Europe? Who's most stressed about this? Because there's certain, areas of the world who are a bit more au fait with technology than others and change than others. Change is constant, right? But people just can't deal with it as well as some others. So that's what I tend to do. I'll sit down with them and get a sense of how they're going to engage with our people. That comes before any tech talks. That business plan, the communications plan, the change agenda. Some of the mistakes I've made in my earlier career is not having a strong change agenda in place where I can communicate to my people at key points throughout the project. We're so busy trying to make deadlines that we forget about the people that we're actually here to serve. So I've been burnt that way, as I said earlier, where people complain and they don't take on board what I'm trying to achieve. So I've learnt the hard way, and this is why I talk like this.
I think people really love this more practical and granular help. I don't know a single manager or executive out there who doesn't struggle with employee communication.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the biggest stressors that we just don't talk about enough.
Yeah, most definitely. And it's an area that I've always managed digital comms, then moving to digital experience and digital products. So it's always been a thread throughout my career. And because I've worked in so many communications departments, which I've loved, I've taken my expertise in communications and applied that to my digital transformation programs. And I think this is why I talk the way I talk. I haven't come from a tech background. I've come from a digital product and a digital communications background. And that's that kind of happy medium to creating great digital transformation.
During the pandemic, I think we saw a really healthy shift in leadership with a lot of leaders who, because nobody knew what the heck was going on in the world, leaders had to get comfortable with saying, listen, I don't know what's happening. The CDC doesn't know what's happening. The WHO doesn't know what's happening. Here's what I know. Can you join me for what we know together? That was really profound. And I think people, as horrible as those times were, people valued that.
Yeah, they do. And I think it now is the time you always have, a digital change, a digital comms person embedded in any digital transformation program. All companies should know that. So it's something that is key. And that person is always very busy, especially these long programs where you're constantly having to explain what you're trying to achieve. You don't say it once. I think there's a saying, you have to say things a number of times before people understand what you're trying to achieve. And I think that's really important. You can't say it once. You have to say it numerous times because often, global matrix organizations, they don't cascade. The information doesn't always go through the organization. So you always have to have this message on repeat. through different channels to different types of people, making sure you're saying it in a different way depending on who you're speaking to, their level of understanding, their level of seniority. And, people who are, dare I say it, the worriers, you can almost segment your audiences. Say this part of the business are worried about this change. Let's carve the message up in this way as opposed to the people over here who are gung-ho, who are really going for it. So you can segment your audience to really target how people are feeling, especially, when you take that temperature, you hear how people are speaking, you can do that. And I've seen it done successfully. So I take all those nuggets of wisdom with me when I'm doing my programs. And stakeholder engagement and management, it's always one of the most, I love it. It's one of I do love building relationships with my stakeholders, but it's one of the most draining areas of a program. And that's where I take a lot of my kind of learnings from to build those relationships with my stakeholders. Because I find once you do that, you find the technical aspects of these programs tend to take care of themselves because, dare I say it, the tech can be the easy part in a lot of digital transformation programs. It's the communication, it's the way you treat people, the respect you give them, the empathy, the fact that they feel they're being heard, because they're frustrated in broken processes, things that take, twice as long, 3 times as long to do, which has been a real feature since we moved to hybrid working, where people are struggling at home alone, doing things that they could turn to their neighbor to do. I know a lot of companies are bringing people back into the office like 3-4 days a week, but people are still working, trying to get things done by themselves. And they're using things like AI, on a day-to-day basis. So as well as implementing AI from the top down, people are also, we call it shadow AI, right? Shadow AI, where people are using their own tools for all the worry and stress of change. Are they going to actually then improve their own work lives? So they're using things to help them write a draft of content better. They're using things to help them search for content and upload some document, a vendor management, some kind of process. They're using different AI tools to help them get past the repetitiveness and drudgery of some of the administrative areas of their work. People are actually doing that themselves. So I think we need to acknowledge that as well as the work going on from leadership down throughout the organization, we're also getting a lot of workers using AI to ease their stress and their worry to help them get the job done, be productive.
I was thinking as we close here, I would imagine I travel a lot and I always am seeing pilots on hold with their airline. There's this arcane system for aircrew. They have to often call and get updates. And what a nightmare, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure that if you polled most airline staff, they would say, bring the AI on. We are ready.
Yeah, most definitely. All those jobs that, that are repetitive. There's, I always make the joke about, I'm not going to say it, but there's a lady in Tokyo, those airports, their job for the entire day is to put this cushion. So when the suitcases come from the plane, they land on something very soft.
Oh, that's so nice.
Seen that? So the suitcases aren't banging against each other, and the women are just standing there all day, making sure the suitcases land gently and they don't get cracked.
That doesn't happen at LaGuardia, let me tell you.
But, you've got all kinds of things that we could do better and increase the richness in our lives. So, I might sound like a Debbie Downer, and I'm excited for things, but I'm just, really looking forward to us cleaning up our data, getting our governance right, really looking at how we're setting up, looking at what some of those vendors are telling us these shiny new tools can do and being realistic about how that's actually going to work.
Mm-hmm.
But really bringing our people along, because it's going to be a bumpy ride here and there, but I think it will be amazing when we get there and as we get there. So, all credit to organizations who are already doing what I'm suggesting, because there are loads of them out there, but there are some that just aren't, because they're under pressure to show the value in what AI can do. So they're kind of meeting deadlines and they're just looking to produce KPIs, meet KPIs and so forth without really considering who this is for. So, let's see. Watch this space, as they say.
Watch this space. Susan, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Really enjoyed it.
That's it for this episode of The Anxious Achiever. The show is produced and edited by Mary Dew with production support and sound engineering by Nick Krinko. If you like what you heard, head to your favorite podcast app. Leave us a review. It really matters, and we appreciate the time and effort it takes. And if you don't subscribe or follow the show already, now's the time. And let us know what you'd like to hear more of. I get some of my best ideas from my listeners, so find me on LinkedIn, send me a message. You can find my weekly newsletter there as well. A big thanks to LinkedIn and all the listeners out there and our guests in the Anxious Achiever world. Until next time.